In 1870, a 31-year-old man in Cleveland, Ohio, controlled 4% of America's oil refining capacity. By 1880, he controlled 90%. By 1904, he controlled 91% of oil production, 85% of final sales, and had created the template for every monopoly that exists today. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and the system he built, the corporate structures he invented, the monopolistic tactics he perfected, they didn't die when Standard Oil was broken up in 1911. They evolved. They spread, and they control your life right now in 2026. The gasoline you pump, the drugs you buy, the tech platforms you use, the food you eat, the banks you borrow from, every single one uses the Rockefeller playbook. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, regulatory capture, tax-exempt foundations that shape policy and market dominance so complete that competition becomes impossible. Rockefeller didn't just build an oil empire, he built the architecture of modern corporate control. And you cannot escape it because the system isn't Standard Oil. The system is the method, and that method has been replicated by every dominant corporation for 150 years. Amazon uses it, Google uses it, Pfizer uses it, JPMorgan uses it. They all learned from the same blueprint, the Rockefeller blueprint. Control the supply chain vertically. Eliminate competitors horizontally. Capture the regulators. Use philanthropy to buy legitimacy. And when the government finally breaks you up, make sure the pieces you control are worth more than the whole. Let me show you exactly how Rockefeller built this system, how he used it to become the richest man in history, how Standard Oil's breakup actually made him richer, and why, 115 years after that breakup, you still live in the world Rockefeller designed. Because understanding the system isn't academic, it's survival. The system is designed to extract wealth from you and concentrate it at the top. And once you see how it works, you'll see it everywhere. John Davidson Rockefeller was born July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a con man who sold fake cancer cures and called himself a botanic physician. In reality, he mixed homemade potions in the kitchen and sold them as miracle remedies. He would disappear for weeks at a time, fathered children with another woman, and once brought that woman home to live with his wife. William dressed well, talked big, and projected success he never earned. His mother, Eliza, was the opposite, a devout Baptist who held the household together through prayer, discipline, and silence. This combination, the conman's ruthlessness and the Baptist's moral certainty, would define Rockefeller's entire approach to business. He would destroy competitors without mercy, while believing God had chosen him to organize industry for the betterment of mankind. This wasn't hypocrisy. This was genuine conviction that his monopoly was moral because it brought order to chaos and efficiency to waste. Growing up in this chaotic household, young John learned two things early: how to squeeze maximum value from every penny and how to read people. He raised turkeys and did odd jobs for neighbors to help his mother. When the family settled in Cleveland in 1854, he attended a proper school. But less than a year later, he dropped out to work as a bookkeeper earning 50 cents per day. When his bosses refused him a raise after 2 years, he didn't complain. He decided to replace them. With a $4,000 loan backed by his reputation alone, he started his own produce brokerage. First year, $500,000 in sales. Every bank in Cleveland wanted to lend him money. He was barely 18. The instincts his con-man father gave him were already paying off. But unlike his father, John intended to build something permanent. In 1859, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The oil rush began. Thousands of prospectors flooded into western Pennsylvania. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. Chaos, boom, and bust. Rockefeller saw opportunity, but not in drilling. Drilling was gambling, risky, dependent on luck. He watched men go bust before ever striking oil. Rockefeller saw opportunity in refining, turning crude oil into kerosene for lamps. That was the real business. Let others dig. He would buy what they found. In 1863, Rockefeller invested $4,000 in his first oil refinery in Cleveland. He assembled chemists and engineers who didn't just refine oil, they optimized every step. Early Cleveland refineries operated at about 60% efficiency. Rockefeller pushed higher. His team discovered profitable uses for byproducts that others threw away: paraffin wax, tar, naphtha. Where competitors saw waste, Rockefeller saw revenue. Within 2 years, his refinery was the largest in the city. But Cleveland had 30 refineries. Competition was fierce. Most operated at the edge of bankruptcy. This is where Rockefeller's genius emerged. He didn't try to compete on price. He tried to eliminate competition entirely. And he did it through a method that would become the foundation of corporate America: vertical integration. Vertical integration means controlling every stage of production. Most refineries controlled one step. Rockefeller decided to control all of them. He bought barrel-making factories, tank cars, warehouses, distribution networks. Take the barrels alone. Every refinery needed them. Barrel makers charged whatever they wanted because demand was constant. Rockefeller bought the barrel makers. Overnight, his barrel cost dropped from 25 cents to 15 cents, while his competitors still paid full price to the suppliers he now owned. He did this with every link in the chain. Every step that used to generate profit for someone else, Rockefeller absorbed. If this sounds familiar, it should. This is exactly what Amazon does today, but we'll get to that. This gave him massive cost advantages. Competitors paid 25 cents per barrel. Rockefeller made his own for 15 cents. Competitors paid railroads full price. Rockefeller negotiated secret rebates. The railroads actually paid him to ship his oil and charged his competitors more. This wasn't just efficient, this was predatory. He could sell kerosene at prices that destroyed competitors while still turning a profit. And that's exactly what he did. By 1870, Rockefeller created Standard Oil Company of Ohio. But he still only controlled 4% of American refining. That wasn't enough, so he launched the second phase, horizontal integration. If vertical integration is controlling the supply chain, horizontal integration is buying or destroying every competitor. In 1872, Rockefeller initiated what historians call the Cleveland Massacre. Over 3 months, he approached every refinery owner in Cleveland. He offered to buy. If they agreed, he paid fair market value and often hired them as managers. If they refused, he launched a price war. He dropped kerosene prices below cost, sometimes by as much as 80%. Competitors lost money on every sale. 2 choices: sell to Rockefeller or go bankrupt. Most sold, a few fought. They all lost. By the end of 1872, Rockefeller controlled 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. He went from 4% to 25% of American refining capacity in 3 months. This was the blueprint. Offer to buy. If they refuse, destroy them economically and buy the ruins. This method would be used in every industry, by every monopoly for the next 150 years. Through the 1870s, Rockefeller replicated this massacre across America, city by city, refinery by refinery. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's refining capacity. That's not a business, that's a monopoly. But Rockefeller understood that monopolies face 2 problems. First, they're illegal. Second, they're hated. The public despised him. Newspapers drew cartoons of Standard Oil as a giant octopus, its tentacles gripping not just oil but railroads, shipping, and state legislatures. Politicians who depended on public anger for re-election began pushing back. The sentiment was captured by New York Mayor John Hylan, who, in 1922, publicly accused Rockefeller's Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful bankers of wielding dangerous influence over the government. Whether or not every accusation was fair, the public mood was clear. Rockefeller had become the most hated man in America. Rockefeller needed a solution to both problems, and he found it: the trust. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers created the Standard Oil Trust, the first major corporate trust in American history. Standard Oil of Ohio couldn't legally own companies in other states, but a trust could. 41 shareholders, all Rockefeller and his close associates, controlled the trust. The trust controlled the companies. It wasn't a company. It was a holding company. It didn't produce anything. It just owned other companies. Sugar Trust, Tobacco Trust, Steel Trust, they all copied this structure. And it would evolve into the modern corporation, the parent company owning subsidiaries. Berkshire Hathaway, Alphabet, Meta, Amazon, they're all descendants of Rockefeller's trust. By 1904, Standard Oil controlled 91% of oil refining and 85% of final sales. At his peak in 1913, Rockefeller was worth $400 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars, richer than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates combined. His wealth amounted to 1.5% of the entire United States economic output. No individual before or since has held that proportion of a nation's wealth, but the public was turning. Rockefeller had a strict policy of avoiding the press, which only made journalists dig harder. In 1906, Ida Tarbell published The History of the Standard Oil Company, exposing every tactic: secret rebates, predatory pricing, crushed competitors. The outcry was enormous. Tarbell later described Rockefeller as one of the saddest objects in the world: hairless from alopecia, pale, physically worn down by the empire he'd built on destruction. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and ordered it broken up into 34 separate companies. This should have been the end. It wasn't. It was the beginning of the system's evolution, because Rockefeller still owned shares in all 34 companies. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon. Standard Oil of New York became Mobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron. Before the breakup, Standard Oil stock was worth about $600 per share. After the breakup, the combined value of all 34 companies exceeded $2,000 per share. Rockefeller's wealth tripled. Why? Because the breakup forced each company to compete, driving innovation and efficiency. And because breaking one monopoly into 34 companies that still dominated their regional markets wasn't really breaking up the monopoly, it was reorganizing it. Today, most of those 34 companies have merged back together. Exxon and Mobil merged in 1999. Chevron bought Gulf Oil. BP bought Amoco and Ohio. The Standard Oil monopoly that was broken up in 1911 has essentially reconsolidated into ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP. The system broke itself up to avoid regulation, then quietly put itself back together over 100 years. But Standard Oil isn't even Rockefeller's most enduring legacy. The real legacy is the method. And the method's most brilliant disguise was philanthropy. Rockefeller's public image was toxic, but people can hate a billionaire. They can't hate someone who gives money away. In 1913, Rockefeller created the Rockefeller Foundation with $250 million, over $7 billion today. The cruel oil baron became humanity's great benefactor. But his donations were never neutral. He who pays the piper calls the tune. And Rockefeller knew exactly what tune he wanted played. His first target was education. In the early 1900s, America's school system was decentralized. Rural schools taught in community-oriented ways with varied curricula. Rockefeller saw inefficiency. In 1902, he created the General Education Board, one of the largest private education initiatives in American history. The board's 1906 publication, The Country School of Tomorrow, outlined a vision that was remarkably blunt about its goals, organizing children into a standardized system that would produce reliable workers rather than independent thinkers. Through his foundation, Rockefeller funded reforms that standardized education, rows of desks, bells marking time, repetitive curricula, all modeled on factory logic. The goal was efficiency and scale. The result was a system better at producing obedient employees than critical thinkers. And this model didn't stay in America. It spread globally. The school system you grew up in didn't emerge by accident. It was designed. His second target was medicine. At the time, medical schools taught diverse practices: herbal remedies, naturopathy, homeopathy. Quality varied wildly. Rockefeller saw both a problem and an opportunity. In 1910, he co-funded the Flexner Report with Carnegie. Abraham Flexner inspected medical schools across America. The result? Hundreds were shut down for failing to meet new standards. What remained were institutions aligned with a research-driven pharmaceutical model of medicine. The Rockefeller Foundation funded medical schools like Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago, shaping how doctors were trained for generations. This professionalized medicine enormously. Antibiotics, vaccines, and modern surgery saved millions of lives. That's undeniable. But it also created a system where patented drugs became the default treatment, prevention, and nutrition were sidelined, and the companies producing those drugs became enormously powerful. A cycle emerged. The foundation funded medical schools. Those schools trained doctors in pharmaceutical medicine, and the growing drug industry profited. The system delivered genuine medical progress. It also delivered enormous concentrated wealth. His third target was information itself. Rockefeller understood that science doesn't exist without funding, and journalism doesn't exist without advertising revenue. By sponsoring research institutes, he shaped which scientific directions received support and which withered from neglect. The Rockefeller Foundation became one of the largest funders of scientific research in the early 20th century, giving it enormous influence over what got studied and what didn't. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical industry it helped create became one of the biggest advertisers in American media. Publications that depended on drug advertising had little incentive to question the pharmaceutical model. Critics of mainstream medicine were marginalized. Alternative approaches were sidelined. The public believed they were following objective science, but the science itself was shaped by who funded it. Education, medicine, media. 3 pillars of society, all reshaped by one man's foundation, all connected to the same system of control, and all presented as progress. Now, let me show you the Rockefeller playbook running in real time. Not in a textbook, in your life. Today. Right now. You woke up this morning and checked your phone. You searched something on Google. Google has 92% market share. That's higher than Standard Oil's peak of 91%. But nobody calls it a monopoly because it's free. You're not paying with money. You're paying with data. Every search, every click, every location ping packaged and sold to advertisers. Rockefeller would have loved this, a monopoly so complete that users don't even realize they're paying. And Google's parent company, Alphabet, is a holding company owning YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind, and dozens of subsidiaries. It's the Standard Oil Trust reborn. Same structure, same purpose. Control everything through one entity while appearing to be many. Then you scrolled social media, Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. It doesn't matter which one. They're all Meta. 3 billion users funneled into one company's ecosystem. You think you're choosing a platform. You're choosing which Meta property to use. This is horizontal consolidation, Rockefeller's second weapon, operating at a scale he never imagined. Maybe you ordered something online. Think about this for a second. Amazon started as a bookstore. Now it controls the warehouses, the logistics, the delivery trucks, the payment processing, and the cloud infrastructure that hosts its competitors' websites. AWS alone generates $90 billion per year, more than Amazon's retail profit. That means Amazon makes more money renting server space to companies trying to compete with it than it makes selling you products. Let that sink in. And when Amazon can't buy a competitor, it copies their product using data from its own marketplace and undercuts their price. Amazon Basics is Rockefeller's price war digitized. Same playbook, different century. At some point today, you'll take a medication or visit a doctor. Think about the chain behind that interaction. That doctor spent years in a medical school built on a model the Rockefeller Foundation helped establish over a century ago. The textbooks, the curriculum, the emphasis on pharmaceutical intervention over prevention, that framework traces back to reforms Rockefeller funded in the early 1900s. The pharmaceutical companies that made your drugs, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, they spend more on lobbying than almost any other industry. They fund the FDA through user fees, which means the agency regulating them is financially dependent on them. They lobby for patent extensions that keep drug prices high for decades. They write the regulations they're supposedly governed by. And when those patents finally expire, they reformulate the same drug with a minor change and patent it again. You pay $300 for a medication that costs $5 to produce. That margin isn't an accident. It's the system working exactly as designed. Control the regulators and you control the market. Rockefeller taught them that. And the money you used for all of this, it flowed through banks. JPMorgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, all holding companies using the corporate structure Rockefeller invented in 1882. When Dodd-Frank tried to regulate them after 2008, the holding structure made it nearly impossible. Even the philanthropy continues. The Gates Foundation, $75 billion. Zuckerberg's Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Buffett's Pledge. These aren't just charity, they're tax avoidance, legacy building, and policy influence. Rockefeller invented the model. Modern billionaires perfected it. Every single interaction in your day, searching, scrolling, shopping, medicating, banking, runs through a company using Rockefeller's system. You didn't choose this. You were born into it. Now, let's do the math on what this system costs you. The average American spends $4,000 per year on gasoline, from Standard Oil's descendants, $3,000 on Amazon, $1,400 on out-of-pocket health care through a pharmaceutical system Rockefeller shaped, $4,200 on internet and technology services controlled by Google and Meta. That's $12,600 per year flowing to companies using Rockefeller's system. Over a lifetime, that's $630,000 of wealth transfer. Not to innovative startups, not to small businesses, to monopolistic corporations using 150-year-old tactics to extract maximum profit from you. And you cannot opt out. Refuse gasoline, you need transportation to work. Refuse Amazon, their pricing has already killed your alternatives. Refuse Google, nothing else exists at 92%. Refuse pharmaceutical medicine, licensing, insurance, and cultural acceptance are all shaped by the system. Every door you try leads back to the same room, the room Rockefeller built. This is Rockefeller's ultimate achievement. Not that he became the richest man in history, that he built a system that makes escape impossible. And the family that built it, they're still here. The Rockefeller dynasty didn't fade like other Gilded Age fortunes. On average, only 10% of a wealthy family's assets survive to the third generation. The Rockefellers have been beating that rule for over 150 years. David Rockefeller, John D's grandson, died in 2017 at age 101 as the world's oldest billionaire, worth $3.3 billion. The family's combined wealth is estimated at over $10 billion, spread across hundreds of irrevocable trusts and foundations. They pioneered the family office, a full-service entity managing every aspect of their wealth. The Rockefellers are known to use what's called the waterfall concept, a strategy using permanent tax-exempt life insurance policies to indefinitely postpone taxes on wealth transfers between generations. The system doesn't just protect corporate monopolies, it protects the families who built them. Multiple members of the family served in prominent political roles from the 1950s through 2015, including senators, governors, and a vice president of the United States. The system runs deeper than business. It runs through government itself. Here's what separates Rockefeller from every other robber baron. Carnegie built steel mills. When he died, his personal control ended. Vanderbilt built railroads. When he died, they fragmented. JPMorgan built financial empires. When he died, his dominance faded. But Rockefeller built a system, and systems don't die with their creators. They evolve, they adapt, they spread. Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. Most people hear that as greed, but he meant it theologically. Competition is wasteful. It duplicates effort. It destroys capital. Consolidation is righteous. Monopoly isn't theft. It's the natural end state of efficient markets. He believed this, and he built a system to enforce it. Rockefeller died in 1937 at age 97. He lived long enough to see Standard Oil broken up, reconsolidate, and spread its methods across every industry. He lived long enough to see his foundation reshape medicine and education. He lived long enough to see his grandchildren positioned at the top of American finance and politics. He built a system that outlived him by a century and will outlive us all. 150 years later, we live in that system. 3 to 5 dominant players in every industry. Every year, fewer companies control more. Every year, barriers get higher. Every year, the system gets harder to escape. So what do? You have 3 options. Accept it and use the efficiencies it provides. Resist it, support antitrust, buy from small businesses, even when it costs more. Or understand it and position accordingly. If the system extracts wealth from everyone and concentrates it at the top, own the companies at the top. This is what Rockefeller did. He owned Standard Oil while everyone else bought its products. Own the extractors instead of being extracted from. John D. Rockefeller created a system you cannot escape. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, corporate trusts, regulatory capture, philanthropic influence. That system is the modern economy, and you live in it every single day. Welcome to Rockefeller's world.